What's the best revenge? For billionaire Sebastian Hale, it was publicly crushing his ex-wife, Clara Whitmore, at a high-stakes auction. He thought he'd won, flaunting his much younger fiancée and leaving Clara with nothing but shame. He expected tears. He expected a scene. But what he didn't expect was for her to simply smile, turn her back, and board a private jet so magnificent it made his look like a child's toy. This is the story of how Clara Whitmore turned a public shaming into the ultimate power move. Stick around, because the quietest exits always make the loudest statements. The air in the Sotheby's auction room on York Avenue was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. It was a suffocating blend that Clara Whitmore had once found intoxicating. Now it just smelled of decay. She sat alone in the 10th row, a ghost in a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks preening around her. Her presence was a quiet rebellion. For 5 years, she had been Mrs. Sebastian Hale, a name that opened every door in this city. Now she was just Clara Whitmore, and the only door she was interested in was the one marked Exit. Across the room, Sebastian was holding court. He wasn't just present, he was performing. His voice, a booming baritone she once found comforting, now grated on her nerves. He was flanked by his new fiancée, Lily Ashford, a woman who looked like she had been sculpted from marble and draped in diamonds. Lily was 26, a decade younger than Clara, with the kind of effortless beauty that demanded attention. On her finger, a diamond the size of a small quail's egg caught the light, shooting out blinding white daggers. Sebastian made sure everyone saw it, his hand protectively, possessively on Lily's, turning it this way and that as he greeted acquaintances. He was a master of the subtle boast, the casual display of overwhelming wealth. Clara focused on the catalog in her lap. Lot 37, a collection of rare handwritten letters from Virginia Woolf to Vita Sackville West. They were intimate, raw, and beautiful, a conversation across time between two brilliant women. They had been her holy grail for years. During their marriage, Sebastian had scoffed at her dusty old papers, preferring to invest in art that screamed its value from the wall. He couldn't understand the quiet thrill of holding history in her hands. The bidding for the letters began. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't about Sebastian. This was for her. She raised her paddle. The numbers climbed fast and furious. It was a duel between her and a man in the front row, with a slicked-back ponytail. Finally, the ponytail man shook his head, and the auctioneer's gaze fell on Clara. "Sold," he was about to say when a new voice, loud and clear from the back of the room, cut through the tension. 200,000. Every head turned. It was Sebastian. He hadn't even been paying attention. He was looking directly at Clara, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Lily giggled, a tinkling artificial sound. Clara's blood ran cold. He was doing this purely to spite her. He knew what these letters meant to her. It was a power play, a public humiliation. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and raised her paddle again. 225,000. Sebastian laughed, a short, sharp bark. 300,000. The room was silent now, all pretense of polite chatter gone. It was a spectator sport, the ex-wife versus the new fiancé's champion. Clara's savings could cover this, but it would be a stretch. This was no longer about the letters. It was about drawing a line in the sand. 350,000, she said, her voice betraying a slight tremble. Sebastian's smirk widened. He didn't even say the number. He just nodded to the auctioneer. The auctioneer, a man named Edward Langley who had known them both for years, looked uncomfortable. 400,000 to Mr. Hale. Clara looked at Sebastian. He was a predator toying with his prey. He was enjoying this. He wanted to see her break. He wanted her to retreat. Defeated. But as she met his gaze, she didn't feel defeated. She felt a strange sense of liberation. He could have the letters. He could have the victory. He was buying pieces of paper. She was buying her freedom. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to the auctioneer. Sold. Langley's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed the breaking of the final, invisible chain that had tied her to Sebastian Hale. To Mr. Sebastian Hale, a polite, scattered applause broke out. Sebastian leaned over and kissed Lily, a long, theatrical kiss for the benefit of the audience. Clara stood up. She didn't look at them. She turned and walked out of the auction room, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't see the confused look on Sebastian's face as he watched her go. He had expected tears, a scene, a storming out. He had not expected this quiet, dignified retreat. He had won the battle. But as Clara disappeared into the New York City crowds, he had the unsettling feeling that he had just lost the war. He held up his prize, the letters he didn't want, and for the first time felt the hollowness of his victory. The ghost had left the building, but her specter remained a question mark, hanging in the expensive air. 2 days later, the sky over Teterboro, New Jersey, was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the kind of day that made the private jets lined up on the tarmac gleam like jewels. Clara Whitmore stood by the entrance to the Signature Flight Support Terminal, a single well-worn leather suitcase at her feet. She was dressed for travel in a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater and black trousers. She was flying to London for a book fair, a trip she had planned months ago as a celebration of her new, unencumbered life. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop a few feet away. The driver, a man in a crisp uniform, hurried to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped Sebastian Hale, followed by Lily, who was swathed in a fur coat that was utterly inappropriate for the mild autumn day. Sebastian's eyes scanned the area and landed on Clara. He feigned surprise, a poorly acted charade that was almost insulting. "Clara, what a coincidence!" he boomed, striding towards her, Lily clinging to his arm. "Sebastian," Clara said, her tone flat, neutral. She didn't have the energy for his games today. "Off somewhere?" he asked, his gaze flicking to her single suitcase, a silent judgment on her modest luggage compared to the mountain of Louis Vuitton trunks being unloaded from his rolls. "London," she replied simply. "Ah, London. Business, I assume, still playing with those dusty old books." He gestured vaguely, a dismissive wave of his hand. Before Clara could answer, he pulled Lily forward. "Darling, you remember my ex-wife, Clara. Clara, this is my fiancée, Lily Ashford." "Of course," Lily said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. She extended her left hand, not for a handshake, but to display the ring. The diamond, a flawless cushion-cut behemoth, was impossible to ignore. It was a weapon designed to blind and intimidate. "Sebastian has told me so much about you." "I'm sure he has," Clara said, her eyes meeting Lily's. She didn't look at the ring. This deliberate lack of acknowledgement was a small act of defiance, but it was hers. Sebastian, annoyed that his trump card was being ignored, pressed on. "We're off to St. Bart's for a few weeks, a little pre-wedding getaway. You know how it is. The stress of planning the wedding of the century, it takes its toll." He sighed, a theatrical display of the burdens of the ultra-wealthy. "Our jet is just being prepared." He pointed towards a large but slightly dated Bombardier Global Express. "You're flying commercial, I take it? Must be trying." The condescension was so thick, Clara could have choked on it. She thought of the years she had endured this, the constant subtle digs, the psychological warfare designed to make her feel small, inadequate. She had absorbed it all, letting it chip away at her sense of self. But no more. "Something like that," she said, a faint, enigmatic smile touching her lips. Just then, a low hum grew into a powerful roar. An aircraft impossibly sleek and futuristic, was taxiing towards their terminal. It was a Gulfstream G800, the latest and largest purpose-built private aircraft in the world. Its pearl-white fuselage shimmered in the sunlight, its wingtips raked back like a bird of prey. It made Sebastian's bombardier look like a relic. The jet came to a graceful stop directly in front of them. The door opened, and a staircase descended with a silent, hydraulic hiss. A flight attendant in a sharp, tailored uniform appeared at the top of the stairs. "Ms. Whitmore, we are ready for you." Clara picked up her suitcase. She turned to Sebastian and Lily. Their mouths were slightly agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. The triumphant smirk had vanished from Sebastian's face, replaced by a look of utter, slack-jawed confusion. Lily's grip on his arm had tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. "It was interesting seeing you both," Clara said. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable note of finality in it. "Have a wonderful time in St. Bart's." She walked towards the jet, her steps unhurried, her posture perfect. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel Sebastian's stunned gaze on her back, a silent testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred. As she ascended the stairs and disappeared into the cool, quiet interior of the G800, the door sealing shut behind her, Sebastian Hale was left standing on the tarmac, the gaudy diamond on his fiancée's hand, suddenly looking small and insignificant under the shadow of the magnificent aircraft that had just swallowed his ex-wife whole. The ghost of his past had not only returned, she had upgraded, and he had no idea who he was up against. The interior of the Gulfstream G800 was a sanctuary of understated luxury. There was no gold-plated tackiness, no ostentatious displays of wealth that Sebastian would have insisted upon. Instead, the cabin was a symphony of soft grays, cream-colored leather, and dark, polished wood. It was spacious, quiet, and calming. As Clara settled into a plush armchair, a sense of peace washed over her, a feeling she hadn't realized she had been missing for years. A man emerged from the forward cabin, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored suit couldn't conceal. His hair was dark, with distinguished flecks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly intelligent shade of blue, crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her. This was Julian Vance. "I saw that little drama on the tarmac," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "I almost sent the co-pilot out with a bucket of popcorn." He handed her a glass of water. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," Clara said, taking a sip. "I think I just shed the last 10 pounds of a very toxic marriage." Julian laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the cabin. He took the seat opposite her. "Sebastian Hale. I had my team do a little digging after you first mentioned him. A classic narcissist. All flash, no substance. His entire self-worth is tied to the perception of others. Men like that are incredibly fragile." "You have no idea," Clara murmured, looking out the window as the jet began its powerful, smooth ascent. The world and her past shrank beneath them. She had met Julian Vance 6 months ago at a small independent bookstore in Greenwich Village. She had been reaching for a first edition of Mrs. Dalloway, and so had he. They had struck up a conversation, a real conversation, about books, art, and the quiet joys of a life lived outside the spotlight. He had introduced himself as Julian, a consultant. It was only weeks later, after a series of long dinners and walks through Central Park, that she discovered consultant was a massive understatement. Julian Vance was the founder and CEO of a global technology firm that specialized in data security and artificial intelligence. He was a billionaire, but he wore his wealth like a comfortable, well-worn coat, not a suit of armor like Sebastian. He was fiercely private, rarely photographed, and his name was more likely to be found in the footnotes of academic journals than in the gossip columns. "He was flaunting his fiancée's ring," Clara said, a small, wry smile on her face. "It was the size of a doorknob." "And you," Julian said, his blue eyes twinkling, "countered with a G800. A rather effective checkmate, I thought." "It wasn't my intention," she said, though she couldn't deny the small, wicked thrill she had felt. "But I'm not going to pretend it wasn't satisfying." "Good," Julian said. "You've spent too long diminishing yourself to make a small man feel big. That chapter is over." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, firm, and reassuring. "How are the Virginia Woolf letters?" Clara's heart sank a little. "He bought them, outbid me at the Sotheby's auction. It was a deliberate act of cruelty." Julian was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I see." He took a sip of his drink. "Well, perhaps it's for the best. Sometimes you have to let go of old things to make room for the new." He changed the subject, steering the conversation towards the London Book Fair, asking her about the dealers she was excited to meet, the lectures she planned to attend. He listened. Truly listened. His attention focused entirely on her. It was this, more than the private jet or the limitless resources at his disposal, that was the true measure of the man. He saw her, the real her, the woman who loved dusty old books and quiet afternoons. With Sebastian, she had been an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed. With Julian, she was a partner. As they flew east, chasing the sun, Clara felt a profound sense of brightness. The turbulence of her past was finally smoothing out into clear, open skies. She was no longer a ghost at someone else's feast. She was the guest of honor at her own. She leaned her head back against the soft leather, the hum of the powerful engines a lullaby of her new life, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly safe. The man in the jet was not just her billionaire boyfriend. He was her safe harbor, the quiet, steady anchor in the storm she had just escaped, and together they were flying towards a future she was finally excited to embrace. Sebastian Hale stood on the tarmac at Teterboro long after the Gulfstream G800 had become a silver speck in the vast blue sky. The roar of its engines had been replaced by a ringing in his ears. The triumphant high from the auction, the smug satisfaction of flaunting his wealth, had evaporated, leaving a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. "Sebastian, darling, are we going?" Lily's voice, usually a melodic purr, was sharp, impatient. The pre-wedding glow had been replaced by a pout. Her perfect St. Bart's vacation was being delayed. "What was that?" Sebastian muttered, not to her, but to himself. "Whose jet was that?" "How should I know?" Lily snapped, pulling her ridiculous fur coat tighter around her. "Does it matter? It's probably a rental. She's probably shacking up with some vulgar new money type to pay her bills." But Sebastian knew it wasn't a rental. He had seen the discreet custom logo on the tail fin, a stylized W intertwined with a V. That was a private insignia. That was ownership. And the G800, he knew what those cost. The base model was nearly $80 million. With custom interiors, you were pushing $100 million. That wasn't new money. That was a different stratosphere of wealth, a level that made his own considerable fortune feel pedestrian. The flight to St. Bart's was tense. Sebastian was silent, staring out the window, replaying the scene at the airfield over and over in his mind. Clara's calm, her enigmatic smile, her complete and utter lack of intimidation. It was as if she were a different person. The quiet, accommodating woman he had divorced, the woman he had so easily crushed at the auction, was gone. In her place was this cool, confident stranger who boarded $100 million jets as if she were hailing a taxi. As soon as they landed and checked into their beachfront villa at the Eden Rock, Sebastian was on the phone. He called his PI, a former NYPD detective named Ray Navarro. "Ray, I need you to find something out for me," Sebastian said, pacing the marble floors of the villa. "A Gulfstream G800, tail number, I didn't get it, but it had a custom logo on the tail, a W and a V intertwined." "A G800, that's a big bird, Sebastian. Not many of those around," Ray said. What's this about?" "My ex-wife was on it," Sebastian said, the words tasting like ash. "Clara. I thought she was, well, you know." "Yeah, well, apparently not," Sebastian grumbled. "Find out who owns it, and find out who she was with. I want a name, Ray. I want to know everything." The wait was agonizing. Sebastian tried to play the part of the doting fiancé, taking Lily to designer boutiques in Gustavia and to dinner at Bonito, but his heart wasn't in it. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the mystery of Clara and her new life. Lily, sensing his distraction, grew increasingly petulant. "Sebastian, are you even listening to me?" she complained over a plate of ridiculously expensive lobster. "I was talking about the seating chart for the wedding. We can't put my mother next to your Aunt Carol, not after the incident at the engagement party." "Fine, whatever you want, Lily," he said, waving his hand dismissively as he checked his phone for the 10th time that hour. The call from Ray came 2 days later. Sebastian was sitting by the infinity pool, a cocktail sweating in his hand. "I have a name for you, Sebastian," Ray said, his voice grim. "But you're not going to like it." "Just tell me," Sebastian snapped. "The jet is registered to a shell corporation, but the beneficial owner is a man named Julian Vance." The name meant nothing to Sebastian. "Julian Vance? Who the hell is Julian Vance?" "He's the founder and CEO of a company called Helios AI. They're a global tech firm. Data security, artificial intelligence, government contracts. He's very, very private. Almost a ghost. No social media, very few public photos. But he's significant." "Significant? What does that mean? How much is he worth?" This was the metric Sebastian understood. This was the language of his world. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sebastian, this guy isn't in your league. He's not even playing the same sport. We're talking about a net worth estimated to be north of $30 billion with a B." The cocktail glass slipped from Sebastian's hand and shattered on the stone patio. $30 billion. The number was so vast it was almost incomprehensible. It was a figure that turned his own $250 million net worth into pocket change. It was the kind of wealth that didn't just buy jets. It bought influence, power, silence. It was the kind of wealth that could make a man like Sebastian Hale disappear without a trace. "Are you sure?" Sebastian whispered, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm sure," Ray said. "And there's more. I looked into Vance's recent activities. He's a major philanthropist, but he does it all anonymously. A few months ago, one of his foundations made a significant acquisition in the world of rare books and manuscripts." A cold dread washed over Sebastian. "What? What acquisition?" "He bought the entire archives of the Hogarth Press, the publishing house founded by Virginia and Leonard Woolf. The entire collection, letters, manuscripts, first editions, everything. It was a private sale, very quiet. The seller was a small, struggling university press in England." Sebastian sank into a lounge chair, his head spinning. The letters. The Virginia Woolf letters he had bought at Sotheby's to humiliate Clara. They were a drop in the ocean compared to what this man, this Julian Vance, had given her. Sebastian had bought her a page. Vance had bought her the entire library. The dusty old papers Sebastian had mocked were now the foundation of a collection curated by one of the world's richest men. Clara hadn't lost at the auction. She had just been letting him win a meaningless skirmish while she was on her way to claiming an empire. He looked at Lily, who was taking selfies by the pool, pouting her lips at her phone's camera. He looked at the diamond on her finger, the ring he had been so proud of. It suddenly looked cheap, garish, a desperate plea for attention. His world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of perceived superiority, was beginning to crack. And in those cracks, a terrifying new reality was taking root. Clara Whitmore, his mousy, unassuming ex-wife, was now involved with a man who could buy and sell him 100 times over without even noticing. The unraveling of Sebastian Hale had begun. The annual conservation gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the glittering apex of the New York social season. It was a night where fortunes were pledged, reputations were polished, and the city's intricate power dynamics were on full public display. For Sebastian Hale, it had always been a home game, a night to reinforce his status at the center of this universe. This year, however, the universe seemed to have tilted on its axis. He and Lily arrived in a flurry of camera flashes, Lily in a Scarlett O'Hara-esque crimson gown that was designed to make an entrance. Sebastian, in a classic Tom Ford tuxedo, played his part, smiling for the cameras, his hand firmly planted on the small of Lily's back. But his eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for a ghost. He didn't have to search for long. He saw her across the great hall, standing near the entrance to the Temple of Dender. It was Clara, and she was breathtaking. She was wearing a simple column-like gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the lights. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of delicate diamond and sapphire earrings. She was talking to a small group of people, and as she laughed at something one of them said, the sound seemed to carry across the cavernous space a note of pure, unadulterated joy. Beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm, was Julian Vance. In person, he was even more imposing than Sebastian had imagined. He radiated a quiet intensity, a stillness that was more powerful than Sebastian's practiced bravado. He wasn't looking around the room, seeking approval or attention. His focus was entirely on Clara. The whispers started almost immediately. "Is that Clara Whitmore? Who's she with? I've never seen him before." "That's Julian Vance, the Helios AI guy." "No, it can't be. He never comes to these things." "Well, he's here now, and he can't take his eyes off her." Sebastian watched as a procession of people he had considered his allies, his friends, made their way towards Clara and Julian. People who had dropped Clara from their guest lists the moment the divorce was announced. People who had sided with him, who had listened to his version of the story. Now they were fawning over her, their smiles wide, their laughter a little too loud. He saw Henry and Miranda Devon, a couple he had known for 20 years, practically elbow their way through the crowd to greet Clara with effusive air kisses. Miranda had once told Lily that Clara was a lovely girl, but a bit of a bore. Now she was hanging on Clara's every word. The ultimate humiliation came when Sebastian and Lily approached the main receiving line for the museum's director, Charles Greer. They were standing behind the Devons, who were now chatting animatedly with Clara and Julian. As the line moved forward, Charles Greer greeted the Devons. Then his eyes lit up as he saw the couple behind them. "Julian, I can't believe you made it," Greer said, bypassing Sebastian completely to shake Julian's hand warmly. "And Clara, you look absolutely stunning. We were so thrilled when we heard about the endowment for the new manuscript wing. It's a game changer for us." Sebastian froze. The manuscript wing? He shot a look at Clara. She met his gaze, her expression calm, unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes. "No, I told you so." There was just a quiet confidence that was more unnerving than any overt display of victory. "Sebastian, Lily, so good to see you," Greer said, finally turning to them, his tone polite but noticeably cooler. The moment was fleeting, but in the shark-infested waters of Manhattan society, it was a mortal wound. They had been snubbed publicly. Lily was seething. "What was that all about?" she hissed as they moved away from the receiving line. "A manuscript wing. Is that where her new boyfriend is parking his money? How utterly dull." But Sebastian knew it wasn't dull. It was strategic. It was a display of power that was both subtle and absolute. He wasn't just buying her jets. He was building her legacies. He was immortalizing her passion in the stone and glass of the world's most famous museum. What could Sebastian's diamond ring compete with that? Throughout the dinner, the humiliation continued. Their table, usually a prime spot near the stage, was in a less desirable location closer to the kitchens. From across the room, Sebastian could see Clara and Julian seated at the director's table, flanked by senators, artists, and titans of industry. He watched as Julian leaned over and whispered something in Clara's ear, making her laugh. The intimacy of the gesture was a knife in Sebastian's gut. He was losing. He was losing a game he hadn't even known he was playing. His wealth, his status, his beautiful fiancée, the pillars of his identity, were proving to be a house of cards in the face of Clara's new reality. He had thought he had erased her, but instead, she had been reborn, stronger, more radiant, and powered by a force he could not comprehend or compete with. The whispers at the Met were a death knell for the world he had known. The ghost of his past was now the queen of the ball, and he was just a spectator in the cheap seats, watching her coronation. The days following the Met Gala were a slow-motion nightmare for Sebastian Hale. His world, once a glittering fortress of his own making, was being dismantled brick by brick. The story of his public snubbing had become a cautionary anecdote whispered over cocktails at the Bemelmans bar and dissected at lunches at La Goulue. Business associates who once clamored for his time now had secretaries who informed him they were in meetings indefinitely. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the edges of a world that no longer wanted him. His relationship with Lily crumbled under the pressure. Her affection had been transactional, a currency exchanged for the status he provided. With his social capital plummeting, she had become openly contemptuous. The wedding planning devolved into a theater of cruelty. "Are you sure you can still afford the custom-built ice sculpture of two swans kissing?" she asked one evening, her voice dripping with venom as she browsed a bridal magazine. They were in their cavernous Fifth Avenue apartment, which suddenly felt less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. "Perhaps we should scale back. We don't want to look desperate. It's so unbecoming." The final fatal blow came 2 weeks after the gala. Sebastian was banking on a merger with a rival firm, a deal that would have been a lifeline, a public declaration that he was still a player. The CEO, a man named Richard Cole, with whom he'd shared cigars and golfed for years, called him personally. "Sebastian, bad news," Richard said, his voice strained with false sympathy. "The board's got cold feet, unforeseen market volatility." But Sebastian heard the truth in the silence between the words. Richard's wife, a formidable woman who chaired 2 museum boards, had been at Charles Greer's table at the Met. She had witnessed his humiliation firsthand. It wasn't market volatility. It was social contagion. He was toxic. A black, venomous rage began to boil in his gut. It was a potent cocktail of wounded pride, consuming jealousy, and a bizarre, twisted sense of ownership over the woman at the center of it all. Clara. It was all her fault. He became obsessed. He had his PI Ray send him daily reports on her movements. On Julian Vance. He learned that Vance had not only bought her the Hogarth Press archives, but had also established a fellowship in her name at Columbia University for the study of modernist literature. Each new detail was another twist of the knife. Driven by this corrosive fury, he did something he knew was reckless. He found out where she was living. It wasn't hard. The entire city was buzzing about the triplex penthouse Julian Vance had recently purchased at 220 Central Park South, the so-called Billionaire's bunker. He went there on a Tuesday afternoon, a man on a mission of self-destruction. In the taxi ride downtown, he rehearsed his speech, a tirade of accusations and blame. When he arrived, he strode into the limestone-clad lobby, a place of hushed, intimidating wealth. The doorman, a man he would have once tipped $100 without a thought, regarded him with cool indifference. "I'm here to see Clara Whitmore," Sebastian announced, his voice a little too loud. "Is she expecting you, sir?" the doorman asked, not moving. "We're old friends." Sebastian bluffed, the words tasting like acid. He flashed a Patek Philippe watch like a badge of honor, but the doorman was unimpressed. Sebastian's name, it seemed, was no longer a key that opened all doors. He was forced to use a connection, calling a friend on the building's board to be allowed up. The humiliation of it stoked his rage even further. He rode the private elevator, its walls lined in brushed bronze, his heart pounding a frantic, angry rhythm. The ascent was silent, smooth, and felt like a journey to his own execution. When the doors opened directly into the apartment's foyer, he was momentarily stunned into silence. The space wasn't just large. It was a testament to a level of taste and wealth he'd only ever pretended to have. The marble floors were a seamless expanse of white, veined with subtle gray. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park like a living masterpiece. The art on the walls was quiet but significant. A small, pensive Rothko, a delicate Twombly. There was no gold, no glitz, none of the gaudy look-at-me decor he favored. It was the home of someone who didn't need to shout about their money. And there, standing in a pool of afternoon sun, was Clara. She was arranging a simple bouquet of white tulips in a vase, and she didn't look surprised to see him. She just looked weary. "Sebastian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You shouldn't be here. I needed to talk to you," he snarled, striding into the room. "What is this, Clara? What are you doing?" "I'm arranging flowers," she replied, her preternatural calmness infuriating him. "Don't play dumb with me!" he exploded, his voice cracking. "This!" he gestured wildly, his arm encompassing the whole panoramic view. "The jet, the gala, this palace in the sky. Who are you? You are my wife. You were a librarian's daughter from Ohio. I found you. I made you. You were perfectly happy with a book and a cup of tea." "I'm still that person, Sebastian," she said quietly, placing a final tulip in the vase. "You just never bothered to look closely enough to see the rest of me. You saw a reflection of yourself, and you were angry when I didn't match the image you'd created." "And him!" Sebastian spat the word out. "This Julian Vance, you leave me and you immediately find one of the richest men in the world. Is that what this was all about? Were you planning this all along? Playing the mousy little bookworm while you waited for a bigger fish?" Clara finally put down her garden shears and turned to face him fully. Her eyes, which he had once thought of as merely pretty, were now blazing with a cold fire he had never seen before. "No, Sebastian, that's your playbook, not mine. You're the one who equates a person's worth with their bank balance. I fell in love with a man who listened to me, who respected me, who saw me as an equal. His wealth is incidental. It's his character that I love." "Character?" Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think he has character? Men like that don't get to where they are by being nice guys. They're sharks, Clara, just like me." "You're wrong," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was more chilling than a shout. "He's nothing like you." She took a step closer, and for the first time Sebastian felt a flicker of actual fear. "And speaking of character, I think it's time we had an honest talk about yours." She walked over to a sleek minimalist desk and picked up a slim leather-bound folder. "Julian's people, as you would call them, are very thorough. When he fell in love with me, he became concerned about you. Not as a rival, but as a threat. So, they did a little digging into our marriage, into our finances." She opened the folder. "Do you remember the Hale Opportunities Fund, the private investment fund you started during our last year together? The one you told me was too complicated for me to understand?" Sebastian's blood ran cold. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when you forged my signature on the incorporation documents, making me a liable partner without my knowledge," Clara said, her voice like ice. "It became my business when you used it as a shell to illegally hide marital assets from our divorce settlement. And it became my business, Sebastian, when you used it to commit insider trading based on confidential information you wheedled out of my father's oldest friend at the SEC, a dear man you knew I trusted implicitly." She slid a document across the polished surface of the desk. It was a copy of a wire transfer from the Hale Opportunities Fund to an offshore account dated 2 days before a major corporate acquisition was announced. a transaction Sebastian had thought was buried under layers of corporate deceit. "This is a copy," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The originals, along with a sworn affidavit from your former accountant, a man you fired without severance last year who was more than happy to talk, are with the SEC. They are very interested in your complicated fund. The merger you were so excited about, it didn't fall through because of market volatility. It fell through because Richard Cole was given a friendly, anonymous warning that he was about to merge with a man under active federal investigation." Sebastian stared at the paper, his world collapsing in on itself. The bravado, the anger, the jealousy, it all drained away, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He had been so focused on Clara's new life, on the man she was with, that he had never considered that they might be looking back at him with a high-powered telescope. He had seen her as a ghost to be haunted, not a force to be reckoned with. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking, the sound pathetic even to his own ears. "Why are you doing this?" Clara looked at him, not with hatred, but with a kind of profound, sad finality. "You could have just let me go, Sebastian. You could have taken your petty victory at the auction and your new life and just walked away. But you couldn't. Your ego wouldn't allow it. You had to try and crush me one last time. You had to prove you were the winner. Well, congratulations. You've won. You've won an SEC investigation, the end of your engagement, and the complete and utter destruction of the reputation you worked so hard to build." She walked past him towards the window overlooking the park, turning her back on him for the last time. "The doorman will show you out. Goodbye, Sebastian." He stood there for a long moment, a statue in the ruins of his own life, before turning and walking towards the elevator. A defeated man, finally. Truly understanding the meaning of the word loss. He had not just lost his wife. He had lost himself in the process. The confrontation was over, and there was no doubt who had emerged the victor. The Mediterranean sun was a warm, liquid gold blanket on Clara's skin. She was lying on a plush lounger on the deck of the Ataraxia, Julian's magnificent 200-foot sailing yacht, as it cut a silent, graceful path through the turquoise waters of the Aegean Sea. The name, she had learned, was the Greek philosophical term for a state of serene calmness, of being undisturbed by life's chaos. It was a perfect description of her life now. It had been 6 months since the confrontation in the penthouse, 6 months since Sebastian had walked out of her life and into the ruins of his own. The fallout had been swift and brutal, a public spectacle that Clara had watched from a quiet distance. The SEC investigation had become front-page news, with the Wall Street Journal running a series of articles detailing the Hale Opportunities Fund scandal. They painted a damning portrait of a man consumed by greed and arrogance. Lily, in a move of breathtakingly predictable self-preservation, had fled the sinking ship. Her publicist issued a statement dripping with faux sincerity, announcing the end of the engagement due to irreconcilable differences in personal ethics. The statement went on to detail Lily's newfound commitment to philanthropic causes that support transparency and female empowerment. The last Clara had heard, Lily was being photographed on the arm of a minor European royal with a storied title and notoriously empty pockets. She had traded one form of currency for another. Sebastian, stripped of his company, his fiancée, and his reputation, had been forced to sell his assets at fire sale prices to cover his legal fees and fines. The Bombardier jet, the Rolls-Royce, the Fifth Avenue apartment, all were gone, liquidated to pay for his hubris. He had retreated from public life, a disgraced footnote in the annals of New York society. Clara felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. He had built his life on a foundation of sand, and it had been washed away by a tide of his own making. Julian emerged from the cabin, a tray in his hands bearing 2 glasses of chilled white wine and a small plate of figs and cheese. He sat down beside her, his presence a comforting warmth that had become the anchor of her world. "A message came through for you on the satellite comms," he said, handing her a glass. "From Edward Langley at Sotheby's." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought I was off his list of high-value clients." Julian's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Apparently, you're back on it. It seems a certain collection of Virginia Woolf's letters to Vita Sackville West are back on the market. The previous owner defaulted on his payment." He let the statement hang in the warm air. "Langley was wondering if you were still interested. He said he could secure them for you privately before they go to auction again." Clara stared out at the endless blue horizon. She thought about the letters, about the desperate hunger she had felt for them. She thought about the woman she had been in that auction room, feeling small and powerless, seeing those pages as a lifeline to a world of substance. She felt denied. She thought about the sting of Sebastian's casual cruelty, and she realized with a sudden, startling clarity that the hunger was gone. "No," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Tell him thank you, but I'm not interested." Her passion for those letters had been a symptom of a deeper need, a need to connect with a life of the mind, a life of meaning that had been starved in her marriage. Now she was living that life every day. She and Julian spent their evenings reading to each other, debating philosophy, and planning the curriculum for the new literary foundation they had endowed. The letters were a symbol of a craving that had now been satisfied. "I have the real thing now," she said, turning to him, her eyes shining. She leaned over and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss filled with gratitude, and a peace she had once thought unattainable. "I don't need to buy someone else's love letters." Julian smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that." He gestured towards a small leather-bound book on the table beside them, an object she hadn't noticed before. "Because I have something for you." Clara picked it up. The leather was soft and worn, a deep navy blue. There was no title on the cover, only a small embossed W in the bottom corner. She opened it. Inside, on the first page, in elegant, familiar handwriting, were the words, "The collected thoughts of Julian Vance on first meeting Clara Whitmore and thereafter." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and overwhelming emotion. "You wrote this." "I started it the day we met in that bookstore," he said, a faint, endearing blush on his cheeks. "I jot down things after our conversations. It's a bit rambling, I'm afraid, and my penmanship is terrible, but it's all true." Her fingers, trembling slightly, turned the pages. It was filled with observations about her, quotes from books they had discussed, half-formed poems, and heartfelt declarations of his growing love. One entry, dated a week after they met, read, "She speaks of books not as objects, but as old friends. Her passion isn't for the value of a first edition, but for the soul of the story within. She is the rarest thing I have ever encountered. A person who is entirely, authentically herself. It was more intimate, more precious than any collection of famous letters could ever be. It was their history, their story, written not for the world, but just for her. It was proof that she had been seen, truly seen, from the very beginning." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the ink on the page. But they were not the tears of sadness or humiliation she had once known so well. They were tears of pure, cleansing joy. The ghost of her past was finally, completely gone. The auction, the ring, the drama, it all felt like it had happened to someone else in another lifetime. She closed the book and held it to her chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. And to her, it was. She looked out at the endless expanse of the sea, at the horizon where the blue of the water met the blue of the sky. It was a vista of infinite possibility. She had her own letters now, her own story, her own quiet, unshakable love. This was her new beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have ever dared to imagine. In the end, this wasn't just a story about wealth versus wealth. Sebastian Hale's empire, built on ego and illusion, crumbled to dust, while Clara Whitmore's new life flourished. Her ultimate victory wasn't the jet or the galas. It was rediscovering her own worth. She didn't need a billionaire to save her. She needed to save herself by remembering the strong woman she always was. Julian Vance wasn't her rescuer. He was the partner who valued her for who she was, proving that authenticity and character will always triumph over arrogance and flash. What did you think of Clara's incredible comeback? Was Sebastian's downfall karma at its finest? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories of ultimate vindication where the underdog comes out on top, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of love, loss, and sweet, sweet karma.